Hello, fellow YouTubers, and welcome back to Power Up Gamers. Today, I am going to be doing a PDF review of the World of Warcraft, the role-playing game, 2nd edition. Before I get it started, I want to say I play a World of Warcraft heavy for about 6 years, and I still play it every now and then. I enjoy the game. So when I found out they had a role-playing game, it really struck me as interesting because I had never thought they would go that route. Now, I have not played in a session of this, and I have not DM'd it mostly because I'm so busy with 5th edition, making YouTube videos such as this review, and doing things to improve my channel that I haven't really had time to expand into systems I don't particularly know really well. With that being said, the cover art is amazing, just like I would expect from World of Warcraft and Blizzard, which is the company that makes World of Warcraft. I find that the page layout are pretty nice. They have a lot of tables, a lot on the table of contents, because they cover how to make characters, history, the cosmology of World of Warcraft, different abilities, races, classes, prestige classes, armor, magic, spell casting, campaigns, community rules, all would expect from a core handbook. They also have a lot of tables in this PDF supplement, which is good and kind of expected from a core rulebook. So we will be going over all of this. I love the artwork. I love the page colors and setups. I think it's exactly the feel World of Warcraft has always given. So I thought they did really well. The first area is a general introduction in which they talk about Wycken's revised edition and a little bit about the book and the different chapters. And there are 5 main chapters. One part, the first chapter is heroes, the second is equipment, the third's playing the game, the fourth is magic, and then the 5th is campaigns. And then they have the appendix, which includes an open game license. So I thought that was neat how they broke it down. And this is definitely made for people who love the MMO, who love these all the way from Warcraft 1 up to World of Warcraft, and are pretty much diehard fans. But it's also interesting because as new players can come to this tabletop RPG, having just experience with the video games and be kind of in the element. So I thought that was a smart move on Blizzard's part and very helpful, because once they taste what this tabletop RPG is like, they might want to expand out into Dungeons and Dragons, and Numera, Pathfinders, Legend of the Five Rings, Star Wars, all these great tabletop RPGs that we all have known and enjoyed for years. One of the things I really liked on this is they incorporated a lot of the terminology from the games into the terminology in the book. I thought that was a very smart move because, again, it gives people all familiarity with that. Something I found was interesting, and they mention it under the new concepts in the introduction, is not only do they have the classes and the class levels, but they've done something I haven't seen done very much in most tabletop RPGs, and that is they give racial levels. And this is a way to explore more fully a person's racial heritage. And these are taken instead of class levels, but they're balanced, or they give the same kind of benefits. This was very interesting because in tabletop RPGs, you have situations for characters such as an elf who was raised among humans, who doesn't really know elven culture, the elven heritage. And this gives them a mechanically to understand more what it means to be that race. So I thought that interesting aspect, and something that more tabletop RPGs should definitely consider. Okay, so the core mechanics is a 20-sided or a D20 system. So it will be kind of familiar to those who have played tabletop RPGs for a long time. The core mechanic, like always, is if you attempt an action that has a chance of failure, you roll a D20. You add any relevant modifiers or bonuses, and you compare the result to a target number or a DC, which means difficulty class. If you equal or exceed the target number, then you succeed at what you're doing. If not, you fail. Oh. Now, they make it interesting because in most tabletop RPGs, a natural 20 is considered an automatic success or a crit, and the natural 1 is considered an automatic failure or a critical failure. They specified that it's not the case in the World of Warcraft RPG, except for attack rolls and saving throws. So limited to those two areas where most tabletop RPGs, they just say it's all across the board. Dice rolls are described pretty much the same as D&D or other RPGs with expressions like 2d6 plus 4, which means roll 2 6 on add 4, which gives you a result between 6 and 16. And they have a percent of IO dice also. They do specify if you end up with a fraction, you are to round down, even if the fraction is 1/2 or larger. The exception is that certain rolls, such as damage and hit points, have a minimum result of 1. And they also have a rule in the that sometimes you have to multiply a dice roll. Which is pretty standard. So they move into creating characters, and I have not seen an actual character sheet for this RPG. So I can't say how difficult it would be looking at the sheet, but they lay out the basic steps. Step 1 is to develop a concept. And that's just a basic idea of what kind of character play. Whether you're playing alliance or herd, human or orc, or any of the options given, whether your personalities are savage barbarian who loves combat, at fighting, drinking, or you're the quiet, mysterious stranger in the night type character. It's pretty much the same as any other character you would make for any other tabletop. You have to have a concept. Then they generate ability scores. And these are pretty standard. You have your strength, your stamina, agility, which is in some tabletop RPGs is also dexterity, intelligence, spirit, which is equivalent to wisdom in most tabletop RPGs, and charisma. And what they do is they roll 46 times and they drop the lowest. And they have the remaining in 3. So if you roll 46 and you drop the lowest, you'll get a stat number between 3 and 18. And you add it to each ability. And it allows you to pick where you want to add them. And you determine your modifiers and plug them into your character's skill list, attack bonus, initiative, saving throws. All this stuff that, for example, Dungeons and Dragons has in older editions and in 5e. The third step is choosing a race. And they suggest you keep in mind your fellow players and your GM's guidance. For example, your orc will stand out if everyone else is playing alliance races because orcs are almost as a whole race, and vice versa. And they go more into the races in chapter 2. And then you modify your ability scores based on your racial bonuses or penalties. Step 4 is an affiliation. And this doesn't always have to be the case, but it often is. That 95% of the time, your race determines who you're affiliated with. However, your character may have left the alliance or the horde and is attempting to join the other side, or they've claimed themselves as an independent. And they suggest if you're trying to do something like this, you make it part of your background, which is perfectly understandable. Step 5 is choosing a class. And these are really familiar for those who have played the MMO and the video games. You have your paladin, your cleric, your priest, your mage, your hunter, your rogue. Pretty standard class is in the most part. And they talk more about them in chapter 8. And after you pick your class, you determine your skill points and the feats. Then step 7 is determining the character's statistics. And these are the stats that make you different from all the others. Such as if you're playing an orc barbarian, what makes your orc barbarian different from all the other orc barbarians? And these include things like name, gender, age, physical appearance, alignment, your faith if you follow one. Then step 8, you equip the characters, which will be discussed in the equipment chapter. And then you overview it. At step 9, make sure all your math and everything's correct and it's on your sheet. And then in step 10, it's giving you a background. And some GMs like to have a written background, such as myself, just care that you have a firm idea of who your character is, where they came from, and what experiences they've been through that make them who they are. Now, in this is tabletop RPG, all backgrounds we take into account where they were in the third war. This was a big historical event, and they need to know if your character fought, were you sheltered by rich parents, did you see any demons killing your loved ones, and etc. So the next section they do is history and people. And this just goes basically about the land of Azeroth, which is where World of Warcraft takes place. Some of the different wars and conflicts, and some of the major events and they give a timeline as well, which is pretty nice. The timeline is pretty long, and I would not be able to memorize the entire thing, but I could memorize part of it. And that's actually kind of weird because a lot of the timeline has happened in the MMO in different expansion packs. So you would think someone who's played World of Warcraft, the MMO, for years and years, I would be able to remember most of these things and the different names and when it happened, but because there's just so much. They tell you basically what the current climate is, and what they mean there is kind of the political powers and other major wars going on, and kind of the mood. And this really is interesting because the entire mood is that of conflict, and conflicts in World of Warcraft, the MMO, as well as this, is mainly based on racial hatreds. Then they tell you a little bit about the Alliance and the Horde factions, and so you can kind of judge your alliance and what you want to be as one of your affiliations. And they talk about patriotism, etc. They talk a little bit about the geography, and they include some maps. The maps are pretty basic, and they are right along with the lines of the maps you would have in the World of Warcraft MMO. Oh, and they go into a little bit of details, just like ozones as they called in the MMO. And it follows pretty much exactly what the MMO does, as far as geography. Cosmology is pretty much the same thing. It follows Warcraft, the MMO, pretty good. It talks a little bit about elemental planes and a realm called the Emerald Dream. And the Emerald Dream's a primal and unspoiled world. And it's what Azeroth would have been if it weren't for humans, elves, and other intelligent creatures. And their actions such as cutting down forests, farming prairies, diverting rivers, building cities. So it's a natural filter, almost like we would consider the Feywild in Dungeons and Dragons. But I thought it was interesting they included that, because when I played the MMO, they had several quests that involved the Emerald Dream, and I didn't realize it was considered a different plane of existence. I thought it was just as part of the same plane, and just a freak accident type thing. So they continue telling you quite a bit of the lore. Then, and this is all part of the introduction. Then you get into part one, the heroes. And this gives you different things. It tells you how to generate your abilities and the modifiers. It gives artwork that looks almost like a screenshot from the video game or the MMO. It explains each of the stats, such as strength, agility, which is pretty standard, and some really amazing artwork. The artwork is worth the PDF cost alone. So they go in and chapter 2 under the heroes talks about races. And they give you racial description and what they look like, science fiction, distinguishing physical features, what region they come from, what affiliation, and racial traits, all the things that make an elf, a dwarf, etc. And they go into a bit more on the racial levels, which I find fascinating, and I definitely will have to read this in depth at some point. Okay, racial classes or levels work like in most respects. They grant hit dice, skill points, total character level, etc. They never suffer experience point penalties for having levels in a racial class instead of a normal class. And heroes do not need to take levels in other classes before taking levels in racial all classes. So for example, you can play an Iron Forge Dwarf at level 1 and have a racial level 1 and not even have what we would normally think of as a class. And then when you level up, you would be able to add what we would think of as your normal class level to your character, which is interesting. Obviously, characters can't take levels in a race to which they don't belong, even if you're polymorph or shape changed or whatever the case is. So if you start out as a human, you'll always take the human and racial level, if you take racial levels at all. Then they go in and describe the different races, the backgrounds. They give some example names and family names, racial traits. It's just like most tabletop RPG, they list out skills, weapon proficiencies, and they do this for all the races, and the pretty standard races is one thing that is different from most tabletop RPGs is that they allow you to play a goblin and an orc, and some of what we would think of as monster races as a player race, which is pretty interesting, like sessions in where we could do that. And they go through all the races like this. It's troll, orc, gnome. Now, they have what is called the Forsaken as a race, and these are undead, which I thought was interesting because, again, most tabletop RPGs don't allow you to play a monster race. And undead is usually considered race. So then they go into classes. And these are pretty common classes. You have your Arcanist, your Barbarian, your Healer, Paladin, Rogue. They include a couple that aren't standard, which are Scout, Out, and Tinker. And they give you a level chart with what XP you should have, at what level, what benefits you get when you gain a level, etc. Pretty standard. But it looks like they do pretty well. They do give you some different starting packages. They talk about familiars, pretty much everything you need to play the game. So I'm definitely interested in trying it if I can get some people together who would like to try it. I think it would be just as much fun as as most D&D sessions, most tabletop RPGs. I think all the benefits to a tabletop RPG would be present here as well. The greatest benefit I see to using this particular system is that uh, over 10 million people in the world have played a World of Warcraft. And there's, with the new movie coming out, going to be a large amount of people that have never played that see the movie. So this could be very useful in getting people to the table and some experience in tabletop gaming and role playing in something that they're already somewhat familiar with if they're totally new players. And for those of us who have been playing tabletop RPGs for years, I think it would be an interesting experience, but people like their own systems and what they're used to and what they grew up playing. So I don't see it being something that would replace what people are playing. It might, if people really like it that much. So they continue on and they run through all the different skills and how to get them, what each skill does, just like any core rule work. Now, I will say the PDF is over 400 pages long, so it is an extremely long read. But everything you need for the system and to run a game isn't in it. So part 3 is called Playing the Game, and it tells you about your attacks of opportunity, your actions in combat, how combat works, all the typical stuff. And they include basically all the standards on healing, temporary hit points, non-lethal damage, how to move and how far your character can move. Combat modifiers, special attacks, all stuff that most of us are familiar with. And then you have your magic, you have divine, nature, arcane. And it looks pretty similar to most tabletop RPGs. Is. Of course, some of the names of the spells might be different, effects might be different. You might have spells listed here that aren't in other tabletop RPGs. But it pretty much follows pretty much your special abilities is on the MMO, which is nice because for those players who have played it, they'll be familiar with how to use these and what they do. So it's not a lot of attribute learning is required other than making a character and how to make one for the RPG. Hey. Then the last section is campaigns. Now, they give what is called hero points. And hero points are kind of like inspiration, fate points. I'm sure people have heard them called hero points as well, in which you can add it to a dice roll or to increase your chance of succeeding at whatever you're trying to do. And of course, there's different campaign types: dungeon and diplomacy, espionage, exploration, horror, all the standards campaign types that tabletop RPGs have done for decades upon decades. It's they give a small section on NPCs and how to make them, some campaign hooks and adventure hooks, which is pretty nice to have. But it's pretty cool. Now, one thing I do want to touch on, they have what is called a community. And these communities have different feats and abilities. And a community we might think of as a guild, a religious order, a militia force, things along those lines. And they basically lay out a bunch of different abilities, feats. So pretty well done. And on that. The one negative that I see to this does not look like they include any a monster or manimal type stuff or a beast or area where they give you stats as enemies is monsters for your people to fight. So I will double check to make sure that enemy. But in Legion, it's good. They tell you what affiliate belong to. But not particular stats. So that would be probably my number one thing and reason not to pick this up unless I was also picking up a supplement, which I'm sure they have a monster manual type supplement for it. Or for those of us who play another fantasy-based tabletop RPG, we can use those monster supplements as well. So I definitely think it's interesting. I think it would be fun to try it and see if people like it. So I would encourage people to check it out and see what you think of it. Because you never know with the new system, it might be more to your liking than what you currently play. I found that when I switched to 5th edition from 2nd edition D&D, that 5th edition really fit my style and what I liked better. So you never know. Oh, and there's no harm in trying in a new system. If you don't like it or you don't have fun with it, you don't play it again. So with that, I hope my viewers enjoyed this review, and I look forward to hearing your comments and your opinions. Perhaps some of you have played it or tried it, and you can kind of give us a feel for what it's actually like, and not just kind of the mechanics and the rules side of it. So with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to talking with you guys next time. And as always, may the dice roll in your favor.